It happened on a night that should have been like any other. The house was quiet, the kind of deep silence that settles in after midnight when even the walls seem asleep. He lay beside her, half awake, half lost in the drifting fog that comes right before dreams. That was when he heard it. A faint whisper, barely more than breath, slipping through the darkness between them. A name. Not his. Spoken with a softness that carried weight, as if it had lived inside her for years. For a moment, he thought he must have misheard a trick of sleep, a fragment of a dream not yet formed. But her breathing changed afterward, becoming uneven and strained, like someone sifting through something painful behind closed eyes. He lay there frozen, listening as she murmured again, a sound shaped by remorse, almost like a plea. It wasn't loud, but it carried a depth of emotion he hadn't heard from her in a long time. There was something trembling in it, something that didn't belong to the life they shared now. He remained still, afraid to move, afraid to confirm that the tiny fracture forming in his chest was real. In the dim glow of moonlight seeping through the curtains, he studied her face. Her brow tightened, her lips parted as though the words she whispered were pulled unwillingly from some hidden place inside her. Her body shifted, restless, unsettled by whatever she was reliving in her sleep. By morning, the house returned to its usual rhythms, coffee brewing, water running, her quiet footsteps crossing the hall. She smiled at him the way she always did, calm and light, untouched by the shadows of the night before. There was no sign, no hint, no slip that suggested she had spoken someone else's name while lying inches away from him. He tried to let it go. Told himself it must have been nothing more than the blurred boundary between dreaming and waking. But the memory clung to him. Not the word itself, but the tone, the weight, the unmistakable ache woven into it. Long after she left for the day, he stood in the kitchen replaying that single moment, that fragile whisper. It lingered like a fingerprint on his thoughts, impossible to wipe away. For the first time in years, he felt something shift between them, something subtle yet unmistakable, the sense that there was a part of her life he no longer had access to. A door had opened in the darkness, and he wasn't sure he wanted to see what lay behind it. The second time it happened, there was no room left for doubt. It unfolded on a night much like the first, quiet, dim, ordinary in every way except for the heaviness he carried with him into sleep. He drifted off cautiously, as though afraid of what he might hear again, yet unable to prevent it. And then, somewhere in the early hours, her breathing shifted. It started as a tremor, a small flutter of air that didn't belong to peaceful rest. Her hand twitched against the sheets, fingers curling as if gripping something invisible. He kept his eyes closed, not wanting to disturb whatever dream she was sinking into, but also unwilling to break the fragile thread that connected her sleeping truth to his waking fear. Then it came, not the name this time, but something even more startling. A quiet apology slipping into the darkness, shaped by guilt so raw it felt almost intrusive to witness. It wasn't directed at the room or the air. It carried intention, emotion, familiarity. It belonged to someone specific, someone she saw more clearly in her dreams than she seemed to see him during their days together. Her body tightened for a moment, like she was bracing for impact from some memory he couldn't access. She murmured again, words blurred by sleep but heavy with remorse. There was a tremble in her voice, something fragile and broken, the kind of sound people make when they're trying to hold themselves together but can't quite manage it. He lay stiff beside her, not moving, not daring to breathe too deeply. The ceiling above them faded into darkness, but the scene beside him was painfully vivid. It was the kind of moment that changes something inside a person, not with force but with slow, creeping certainty. When dawn arrived, she woke with no signs of unrest. She stretched, yawned lightly, and moved through the morning with practiced ease. Her face was serene, untouched by whatever storm had passed through her mind in the hours just before sunrise. She hummed while folding laundry. She asked what he wanted for dinner. She kissed his cheek casually, unaware of the tightness in his chest. He watched her more closely that day, how her hands lingered on familiar objects, how her eyes drifted off while stirring a cup of tea, how she paused over the framed photo from their early years together. There was a softness around her edges, but not the kind he remembered. This softness felt worn down, as though she was carrying something far heavier than she pretended. He didn't ask. Not yet. A part of him still wanted to believe the whispers meant nothing. But another part, the quieter, sharper part, recognized a pattern forming. Something was beginning to unravel, thread by thread, and it was happening in the space between her dreams and her silence. And he could feel himself beginning to unravel with it. Over the next few days, the whispers stayed with him even when she didn't speak them. They echoed in the spaces between their conversations, in the stillness of the evenings, in the moments when she walked past him without noticing the way his gaze followed her. It wasn't just what she said in her sleep, it was the strange, quiet sadness that seemed to follow her like a second shadow. He began noticing things he hadn't before. Small, almost imperceptible details that would have meant nothing if not for the nights he lay awake listening to her dreams unravel. She had always been someone who touched him in passing, a hand on his arm, a quick embrace, a playful brush of fingers. But now her touches were hesitant, absent-minded, as if she was touching someone who wasn't really there. He watched her stand at the kitchen counter one morning, staring into her coffee long after it had gone cold. She didn't seem sad, exactly, more like someone trapped inside a memory she couldn't step away from. When he spoke her name, she blinked as though returning from someplace far away. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. In the evenings, she spent more time alone. Sitting by the bedroom window, scrolling through her phone with a frown she tried to hide. When he walked in, she'd put it down too quickly, the screen going dark before he could glimpse anything. The action wasn't suspicious in the usual sense, it was something else, something heavier. As if whatever she read was meant to stay buried. Her exhaustion grew more visible. She cried in the shower once, so quietly he might have missed it if not for the way her breath hitched. When he asked later if she was all right, she brushed past him with a soft laugh, claiming she was just tired from work. But he could still hear the echo of her muffled sobs long after she walked away. At night, he began to dread sleep. He would lie awake, tense and listening, waiting for her breathing to change, for the murmurs to return. He didn't want to hear them, but he needed to. The uncertainty clawed at him in a way accusations never could. It wasn't the mark of betrayal he feared, but the weight of a truth she seemed to be drowning in. One night, while she slept with her face half buried in the pillow, she clutched the blanket tightly, as though protecting herself from something unseen. Her lips parted, forming a single, trembling word that didn't emerge fully, almost a name, almost a plea. He leaned closer, but the moment slipped away before he could catch it. All that remained was the soft tremor in her breath, the unmistakable sound of someone apologizing in their dreams for a sin they couldn't let go. He began to realize something unsettling, whatever haunted her wasn't new. It was old, deep-rooted, something she had carried long before that night. Something she thought she'd buried. And he understood, with a slow and painful certainty, that he wasn't competing with another man in her present. He was competing with a ghost from her past. The unease followed him everywhere now, a constant presence that sat behind his ribs like a quiet weight. He went through his days pretending life hadn't shifted, pretending the whispers at night didn't gnaw at him, pretending he didn't feel her slipping further into a place he couldn't reach. But the pretense cracked more each day, revealing something raw beneath it. She moved through the house like someone who was trying to stay busy enough to outrun her thoughts. She baked things she didn't eat, cleaned rooms that didn't need cleaning, rearranged shelves she'd organized only a week before. He watched her drift from task to task, her expression soft but distant, as if she was trying to fill every corner of her mind with noise to drown out something echoing inside her. He caught her once standing in the hallway, staring at an old photo of the two of them from years ago. Her fingers rested lightly on the frame, tracing the image of herself as though studying a stranger. Her eyes were glossy, not quite crying but close, and she didn't notice he was watching until she quickly turned away and wiped her face as if it were just dust. Small shifts kept piling up. She forgot simple things, where she'd left her keys, whether she'd already fed the dog, the ending of stories she used to tell fondly. And yet she remembered other things with painful clarity, moments tied to places and people she never spoke of anymore. He would find her staring at old text threads she never opened, hovering over them with an expression he couldn't decipher. She woke earlier than usual, slipping quietly out of bed as though afraid to disturb him. Those mornings were the ones that left him most unsettled. He'd wake to the faint smell of coffee in the kitchen or the soft creak of the floorboards, knowing she had been awake long enough for the shadows beneath her eyes to settle deeper. But it was the nights that carved into him the most. She slept fitfully, tossing lightly, her breath catching at uneven intervals. Sometimes her hands balled into fists. Other times her face softened, and she whispered something that sounded almost like longing, like grief. No names now, just those broken apologies, repeated with a sadness that felt too heavy for sleep. He didn't touch her during these episodes. He didn't wake her. He simply lay beside her, listening, absorbing every tremor in her voice, every shaky breath, every fragment of emotion spilling out without permission. It was like listening to someone confess in a language he almost understood but couldn't fully translate. The disconnect between her waking self and her dreaming self grew sharper each day. By daylight, she smiled politely, functioning like someone holding tightly to the edges of her life. By night, she unraveled piece by piece, revealing a wound she had hidden even from herself. He tried to rationalize it, to convince himself it was merely stress or exhaustion or memories resurfacing without meaning. But a quieter, more instinctive part of him began to understand that whatever haunted her had never truly died. It lived in the corners of her mind, waiting for nightfall to surface. And he felt the shift happening inside himself too, the slow realization that he was no longer watching a marriage in motion, but a woman sinking into a past he had never been invited into. What terrified him wasn't the possibility of betrayal. It was the possibility that she didn't know how to return to him anymore. The moment that changed everything didn't happen with a discovery or a confrontation. It began with a simple, quiet impulse, the kind that forms when worry has simmered too long. He didn't plan to look through her phone. He didn't intend to cross that invisible line they had both respected for years. But one afternoon, she left it on the nightstand, unlocked for once, the screen glowing softly as though inviting the truth to reveal itself. He paused at the doorway, torn between the man he believed himself to be and the man the last few weeks had shaped him into. He wasn't looking for proof of betrayal. He wasn't jealous or suspicious in the traditional sense. What pulled him toward the phone was something deeper, a desperate need to understand the guilt she carried so heavily that it seeped into her dreams. He sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the device. The wallpaper was a picture of them from years ago, one she hadn't changed in a long time. He stared at it for a moment, remembering the ease of that day, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she laughed without restraint. Then he opened her messages. Most threads were ordinary family, co-workers, reminders she sent herself. Normal. Expected. But there was one conversation pinned to the top. A name he didn't recognize. The thread was full, dozens upon dozens of messages, all from her. Not one response. He clicked on it. What he found didn't fit the script of an affair. There were no intimate jokes, no flirtation, no secrecy designed for pleasure. Instead, the messages read like confessions sent into a void. Short, fractured pieces of guilt. I still think about what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I shouldn't have reached out. I'm sorry. I don't know how to move on. I wish I could undo it. Some messages were longer, spiraling into remorse so heavy it felt suffocating. She talked about regret, about mistakes she never healed from, about being haunted by choices she buried. She said she never meant to destroy anything, that she loved her husband, that she didn't understand why the memory still followed her. Each message was raw, stripped of the calm she showed him every morning. It was like reading pages from a journal she would never let anyone see. But the strangest part was the silence. Not a single reply. Not even a sign of the message being read. He scrolled further and noticed the earliest messages were from months ago, all unanswered, all pouring from a place of pain he hadn't known she carried. Then he reached the bottom. A final message from her. I know you're gone. I just needed to say it anyway. And suddenly everything clicked, the whispers at night, the apologies, the sadness woven into her gaze. He opened a browser and searched the man's name. The obituary appeared almost instantly. Died 2 years ago. She wasn't talking to someone she loved. She wasn't trying to rekindle anything. She was confessing to a ghost. He set the phone down carefully, hands trembling, breath unsteady. It wasn't betrayal that broke him, it was realizing she had been suffering alone, trapped in the past, drowning in guilt he had thought they'd buried together. And for the first time since the whispers began, he felt something deeper than suspicion. He felt grief not for himself, but for the woman sleeping beside him each night, fighting a ghost who could no longer answer. The truth did not strike him like lightning. It didn't crash into him or burn everything down. Instead, it seeped through him slowly, like cold water rising around his ribs, inch by inch, until he could barely breathe under the quiet pressure of it. He walked through the house in a daze after discovering the messages. Everything looked the same: the neatly folded blankets on the couch, the mug she left beside the sink, her book resting open on the armchair. Nothing in the physical world reflected the storm unfolding inside him. It was surreal to stand in the middle of so much normalcy while holding a truth that rewrote everything. She wasn't cheating. She wasn't hiding a new betrayal. But she also wasn't free from the old one. What shook him most was the depth of her guilt, how it lived in her like a bruise that never healed, something she pressed on night after night until it hurt enough to feel real. He began to see her differently, not as the wife who moved through their life with practiced calm, but as someone carrying a secret so heavy it silenced parts of her. He replayed the details of recent weeks in his mind: the distant stares, the soft hum she used to distract herself, the tears she thought went unnoticed. He realized she hadn't been drifting away from him because she didn't love him, but because she didn't know how to forgive herself for almost losing him years ago. The house's quiet felt sharper now, the kind of silence that reveals the truth instead of hiding it. He watched her from across the living room as she read a book that she hadn't turned a page in for nearly 10 minutes. Her eyes weren't moving, her breathing uneven. She wasn't reading, she was hiding behind the motions of everyday life. He wondered how long she had lived like this. How many nights she had whispered apologies he hadn't heard. How many times she had smiled through the day with remnants of guilt clinging to her ribs. The realization stung, not because she had lied, but because she had suffered alone. He remembered the man she had cheated with, a name he had chosen to forget years ago, a chapter they had both agreed to close. He had forgiven her then. He thought they had moved forward. He thought the past was something they buried side by side. But she had buried it alone, and not deeply enough. He didn't tell her he knew. Not yet. The truth felt too fragile to touch, too delicate to break open without causing more harm. He wasn't ready to confront her sorrow or his own confusion. Instead, he watched her, trying to understand the shape of her pain, the way guilt had carved space inside her, the way it had become a companion she didn't want but couldn't let go of. He lay awake that night listening to her breathe, waiting for the whispers to return. They didn't. She slept silently, peacefully, as if the storm had retreated for a moment. But he knew it was temporary. The weight she carried did not lift easily. And as he lay there, eyes open in the dark, he realized something he had never considered before. Forgiveness only works when both people accept it. He had forgiven her. But she had never forgiven herself. After that night, something shifted inside him, a quiet, heavy awareness that changed the way he moved through their days. He no longer looked at her searching for signs of betrayal. Instead, he searched for the places where her guilt showed through the cracks. The distance between them wasn't born from infidelity in the present, it was the echo of a wound she had carried for years, one she tried to hide beneath gentle smiles and practiced routines. She moved through the house like someone trying to stay balanced on uneven ground. Her movements were precise, careful, as though she was afraid of disturbing something fragile. He noticed the way she hesitated before entering rooms, pausing for the briefest moment as if checking to make sure she could hold herself together before stepping inside. She had become an expert at silent restraint, keeping her pain tucked neatly into the spaces between breaths. Meals became quieter. She still cooked his favorites, but the joy she once took in sharing them had faded. She ate less, pushed food around her plate, lost herself in thought while he watched from across the table. He found himself memorizing these small details: the way her fork trembled slightly when she set it down, the way she swallowed hard after long stretches of silence, the way her eyes drifted to the window as though she were waiting for something that would never arrive. He began noticing her exhaustion more clearly. She went to bed earlier but woke up looking more tired. She avoided looking at her phone in front of him, yet he sometimes caught her staring at it late at night when she thought he was asleep, the screen's glow reflecting the sadness in her eyes. She never typed anything then, never opened the messages again. She simply stared at the empty thread, as if waiting for a response that would never come. They slept with their backs turned more often than not. Not out of anger, but out of a shared unspoken fear, hers of breaking down, his of pressing too close to a truth he wasn't ready to speak aloud. Yet even with the distance, he could still feel the tension beneath her quiet breathing, the lingering tremor of someone haunted by a memory she couldn't untangle from. He found himself grieving something he still had, a strange, disorienting kind of mourning. Their marriage was intact, their home still shared, their lives still intertwined. But the version of her who once opened up to him so freely felt out of reach, replaced by someone quietly unraveling under the weight of her own remorse. He didn't know how to help her. He didn't know whether help was even possible when the wound belonged to a time before healing had a chance to begin. All he could do was watch, listen, and feel the ache grow deeper as he realized the truth. She wasn't drifting toward another man. She was drifting toward a ghost she couldn't put down. And he was losing her not to passion, not to betrayal, but to grief, a grief she didn't think she deserved to share with him. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of quiet that felt heavier than any argument could have. Nothing was spoken aloud, yet everything felt louder. He moved through the house with the awareness of someone crossing a field of glass, cautious, deliberate, afraid that any wrong step might shatter what little peace remained between them. She drifted further inward. Even when she was physically near him, her presence felt thin, almost translucent, like she was fading into some private realm of memory he could not access. She spoke less, choosing silence over conversations that once flowed easily. When she did speak, her voice carried an unfamiliar softness, as though every word was chosen carefully to prevent anything from slipping through. He noticed how she lingered longer in front of the mirror, not out of vanity, but contemplation. Her fingertips traced her own reflection lightly, almost sorrowfully, as if trying to remember the person she used to be. Sometimes she stared so long that her expression blurred into something distant, something hollowed out by years of unspoken guilt. At night, she lay still for long stretches, awake but pretending to sleep. He could feel the slight tension in her muscles, hear the careful control of her breathing. The whispers had stopped, and in their absence, he felt an even deeper ache, as if her silence signaled a retreat into the very pain she feared to admit. She no longer murmured apologies or names. She no longer reached for him unconsciously. Instead, her dreams offered no evidence of escape, and her waking hours offered no explanation. He found himself withdrawn as well, not out of resentment but weariness. He carried the knowledge of her messages like a stone beneath his ribs, a quiet, steady pressure he didn't know how to release. Every time he passed her phone on the counter or nightstand, he felt the echo of those unread confessions. They haunted him, not because they betrayed him, but because they revealed a version of her he had never truly known. Their home felt colder. Not in temperature, but in the subtle way emptiness fills a place once warmed by connection. The laughter that used to echo through the kitchen had thinned into silence. The gentle routines, shared coffee, casual conversations, soft touches had dwindled to rituals carried out separately, like two people occupying parallel worlds. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, he watched her sit curled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing in particular. Her eyes held a weight, a tiredness that seemed carved from the inside out. He wondered what memories played across her mind, what moments she replayed, what regrets tightened her chest until she whispered apologies in her sleep. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close, to tell her she didn't have to bear it alone, to ask her why she chose to fight a ghost instead of leaning into him. But something held him back, something fragile and uncertain. He feared that touching her pain might break her entirely. He feared that confronting the truth might break him. So he remained still, a witness to her unraveling, quietly hoping she would turn toward him before she drifted too far. But each day, the silence grew deeper, and the space between them widened, not with anger, not with betrayal, but with grief neither of them knew how to speak. The truth settled into him slowly, becoming less of a revelation and more of a quiet, persistent understanding. He began to see their life with new eyes, noticing how many corners of their marriage had become shaped by something unspoken. It wasn't another man living between them, not in the present, not in any tangible way. It was a memory, a shadow, a version of the past she had never fully stepped out of. He watched her move through the house with the careful grace of someone trying not to disturb the remnants of a story she hadn't finished writing. There was a softness in her gestures that felt almost apologetic, the way she folded his shirts with deliberate gentleness, the way she set his coffee down as if afraid it might spill, the way her eyes lingered on him when she thought he wasn't looking. Each action carried a trace of regret, a silent attempt to repair something she believed she had broken beyond recognition. He found himself retracing their history, searching for the moment she had become tethered to her guilt. He remembered the time years ago when she confessed her mistake, the trembling hands, the tearful apologies, the long nights they spent trying to mend what had cracked. He thought they had healed then. He thought forgiveness had closed the wound. But now he understood that forgiveness given is not the same as forgiveness accepted. She had carried her remorse like a secret vow, allowing it to seep into her dreams, her silences, her sleepless nights. She had built an entire internal world around the weight of what she'd done, a world he had never been allowed inside. He started noticing how often she seemed to be listening for something, a message, a sign, a voice that would never come. The way she checked her phone, not out of hope but habit. The way she stared at the unread thread, not expecting an answer but unable to let go. It struck him then just how alone she must have felt in her grief, how deeply she had buried her fear of hurting him again. He saw the pain behind her eyes when she caught him studying her too closely. She would look away quickly, as if afraid he could see the ghost she carried. And in those moments, he realized that she wasn't choosing the past over him, she was trapped in a moment that continued to echo long after it should have faded. The heaviness between them was no longer about suspicion. It had become something more fragile, more tragic, the realization that they were both mourning the same thing without ever saying its name. She mourned the version of herself she had lost. He mourned the ease they once shared before guilt settled into the space between them. He lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside him, breathing deeply for the first time in days. In the stillness, he understood something he hadn't before: he could not fight a ghost for her. He could not erase her guilt, rewrite her memories, or resurrect the man who had become the anchor of her remorse. All he could do was decide whether he had the strength to wait for her to return to him or the courage to let go. As he watched the faint rise and fall of her breath, he felt the full weight of what they had become. Two people sharing a bed but dreaming separate dreams. Two hearts connected by a history neither knew how to carry anymore. The truth didn't break him. The silence did. In the end, nothing exploded. There was no confrontation, no shattering moment of truth flung into the air like broken glass. What came instead was a stillness, a soft, almost tender clarity that arrived one morning as sunlight slipped gently across their bedroom floor. He watched her sleep for a long time before moving. Her face looked peaceful in a way it hadn't for months, untouched by the shadows that haunted her dreams. For a moment, he wondered if this fragile calm was the beginning of healing, or simply the quiet before another wave of guilt pulled her under again. He rose quietly, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. In the corner of the room, her scarf rested draped over a chair, the same one she had worn the night her sleep first revealed the cracks in their life. He picked it up slowly, feeling the softness of the fabric, the faint lingering trace of the perfume that didn't belong to either of them. It held the scent of another life she hadn't let go of, a memory woven into its threads. He folded it carefully and left it on her dresser. Not in anger. Not as a message. But as a gentle acknowledgement of everything he now understood: her guilt, her grief, her inability to step fully into the present because part of her was still trapped in a moment she feared would define her forever. When she woke, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the quiet street below. She paused in the doorway, the air between them still, delicate. She didn't speak. She didn't ask. Perhaps she already knew that he had seen everything she tried to hide. He met her gaze with a softness she didn't expect, not forgiveness, not blame, just a quiet recognition of the truth they had both been avoiding. There were no words for what passed between them. Only acceptance. In the days that followed, something loosened between them, not a breaking, but a gentle shift. He stopped listening for whispers. She stopped staring into her phone. The silence changed shape, becoming less like a barrier and more like a bridge they were cautiously rebuilding, step by small step. He realized then that love doesn't always survive untouched. Sometimes it bends under the weight of old mistakes. Sometimes it grows around them instead, reshaping itself into something quieter, more fragile, but still alive. One evening, weeks later, he watched her fall asleep again, her breathing steady, her expression calm. There were no whispered names, no trembling apologies, no shadows clinging to her dreams. Just silence. Peaceful, at last. He knew the ghost would never disappear completely. But he also knew she was finally learning to let it rest. And in that quiet, he felt himself let go too, not of her, but of the fear that they were already lost. It wasn't a perfect ending. Just a human one.